Hi, this is Bob Wells here, and welcome to Undercurrent Stories. This is the show where we hear about people's interests and uncover some fascinating stories at the same time. I hope you enjoy today's show. In this conversation, I'm delighted to welcome back Steve Snow, who became a senior manager for British Airways and now runs his own training and coaching company. We hear how Steve took on his first management role, how he was approached to work overseas for the airline, and how his commitment to his family involved a move to Scotland. We also hear how he faced and overcame challenges in the face of redundancies and a terrorist attack. I hope you enjoy the show. Yeah. So you're in the product development side. What were you doing after that, Steve?
So then I started applying for these management jobs, Bob, because I thought I was ready then. Yeah, I mean, I'd been in the airline 15 or so years. You know, I'd worked in operations control and I'd done my apprenticeship and I'd flown as cabin crew and I'd done the training bit. And I was also a purser at the end of my training days as well. So I'd been supervising staff on board the aircraft and I'd done the in-flight product development bit. So surely I was the finished article. But no. You know, I wasn't getting that management job, and the common theme for the feedback was I was missing a commercial element to my CV. In other words, I had no sales and marketing experience. So I thought, okay, if you really want to be that pedantic about it, I'll go and get the sales and marketing experience. So I didn't believe for 1 minute that sales was my thing, but I kind of got the feedback and went and ticked the box. So went and worked in world sales based in head office and got experience in, developing rapport and trust, building relationship with corporate clients and building deals with, large corporates around the world. And a bit like my time in ops control, I didn't particularly enjoy it, but I learned an awful lot. And of course, at the end of that stint, it was a couple of years, I felt ready then to really, go for it in terms of an airport management role. So sales was my next stop.
How long were you in sales for?
Couple of years, Bob, in head office. Yeah. And, working in head office is an experience in itself. BA's head office back then was called Speedbird House, and the higher you got in the organisation, the deeper the carpet pile. I think I was on the second floor, so it was a little bit more than vinyl, but it wasn't great carpet pile. But sometimes I would have to go up to the fourth floor, and that was always the thing that struck me was the depth of the carpet pile. Funny how little things like that you remember, and the fact they had a really posh coffee trolley that went round. But sales was a lot more than that. But so I saw an opportunity to join the airport management team at Gatwick Airport, and I hadn't really touched Gatwick. I think I'd been on a couple of flights personally out of Gatwick. So Gatwick Airport was pretty new to me. So I applied for a customer service manager's job at Gatwick Airport and was successful. As you can imagine, when that sort of job comes up in the airline, a lot of people apply for it. So I was very fortunate. I think there was maybe about half a dozen jobs at the time because Gatwick was expanding. Heathrow was full. BA needed to expand Gatwick. So there was a lot of growth there, a lot of opportunity. But hundreds and hundreds of people applied. But I was fortunate to get the job as a customer service manager. But I'd only been in it a short while, and my manager, senior manager for customer services, passenger services at Gatwick, approached me and said, "Steve, we've actually had a little bit of a rethink. Would you be interested and indeed prepared to manage our check-in terminal at Victoria Station?" GLT, as it was called then, Gatwick London Terminal. And I'd heard of it, but I'd never been there. A lot of people would probably have never heard of it unless they lived in central London. It doesn't exist anymore because for various events, security events have happened. It became unfeasible. But at the time, British Airways passengers travelling out of Gatwick could check in at Victoria Station, where there were something like 20 check-in desks, a ticket desk, a foreign exchange. There was even a travel clinic. It was really set up as a kind of mini terminal.
You could drop your bags off and do your passport control.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. You would check in there. All your documentation would be done. Your bag would be taken off you, and you'd never see your bag again until your final destination. And you would then hop on the direct train link to Gatwick Airport, the Gatwick Express, and then head straight for passport control, security, and down to the gate. At its peak for Gatwick, 20% of BA's departing passengers checked in at Victoria, which is hard to imagine. I mean, it was tens of thousands of people. In fact, 20% was the average on some flights, and I'm thinking particularly of Lagos, Nigeria, where it was more than half the flight checked in at Victoria, because a lot of Nigerian people lived in central London.
Yeah.
It became very, very successful. I'd like to think that I had a part to play in that. I think the growth of Gatwick drove a lot of those figures as well. But it became very high on the agenda for BA in terms of, this is maybe a direction to go in.
Yeah, the intention was obviously to drive more business through their airline by making it convenient for people in London to just hop on the train, get checked in, and not worry about the bags, I guess.
Take the pressure away from the airports because they were getting, very, very congested.
Yeah.
But also, if you think about it, at the time, the Channel Tunnel had opened up. So BA had an eye on the fact that a lot of people who were going to Paris, Brussels, and the like were moving towards things like Eurostar. And was that going to have an impact? So there was a little bit of a strategy to think in the next 5 to 10 years that a lot of very, very short haul flights would move to rail.
Yeah.
And therefore investing in rail air interface that we had already at Victoria was a way to go. So on the back of that, something similar was done for Heathrow. So I was part of a team that set up a check-in terminal at Paddington Station for people being able to come along, check in their bags, and go to Heathrow on the Heathrow Express, as it was then. And that was just going to be the start of it, because the next plan was to do similar for St. Pancras. And we were already thinking about investing in Eurostar and becoming a shareholder in that. So at that stage, things were looking very much like that. Eventually, 9/11 put the complete kibosh on all of that.
Yeah.
But if 9/11 hadn't happened, then I think you'd have seen a lot of that development throughout the UK and in Europe. And indeed, it did happen in the rest of the world because I became known as, some people called me the fat controller, and you know what I mean by the fat controller. Not that I was particularly fat, but it was. I was often, my boss thought it was a bit of a pain because I was always getting pinched to go and consult on other developments elsewhere in the world. And I'm thinking of two in particular. One was in Hong Kong and one was in Kuala Lumpur, where they wanted to mirror what we were doing in London. They were building new airports. With the construction of the new airport, they wanted a check-in terminal in the city to make it convenient for people. So I acted as a consultant on the project in Hong Kong, but more so in Kuala Lumpur, where I spent many, many months working on that project out there. So it was an interesting time, and it was a great time. And that was my first kind of permanent move into management. However, things were happening in my personal life then that led me to move to Scotland. But so that was a successful period for me, and I think I'm talking about a four-year period, and great people, great people that I worked with, and I look back at that period, particularly fondly.
You then moved to Scotland. This is where you started getting more into running airport.
That's right. What happened, Bob? I was living near Bray, not far from Windsor, married with a young son, and second child on the way, and probably a lot, going through that kind of that thought process that a lot of people go through in terms of wanting to get something a little bit bigger to live in, but property prices were really, really high. And my wife at the time was from Scotland, and we were up visiting family in the west of Scotland and thinking, well, this is a great place to live, great place to bring up kids, etc. And actually thought, well, why not? And thought, well, I maybe could commute to my job down in London. So anyway, cut a long story short, we sold up and moved to the west of Scotland, Troon to be more specific, and set up home there. And my daughter then was born there, and I commuted for a year to the job in London, which wasn't easy. Being away from home for most of the week. Most of the time, I flew down on a Monday, back up on a Thursday night and work from home on a Friday. That was the ideal, but sometimes it didn't always happen like that. So being away from home during the week wasn't easy, but it's sometimes are these decisions you make for your family. And I think most people can relate to that. So I felt that career had to go on the back burner a little bit, and family came first. So commuting, waiting for a suitable position to come up in Scotland. So after about a year, an opportunity arose at Glasgow Airport, managing the customer services there. So I took it. Some people questioned that as a career move, but it was the right thing for me and my family at the time. Yeah. Still with British Airways. So I took that position, and then so initially I was just looking after the passenger services side of the airport, and it was a very busy operation for BA then. We had something like 100 flights a day, 100 movements a day. Then, I mean, it's very different now. We had flights all over the UK. We had flights to not only, almost hourly flights to Heathrow and Gatwick, but we had flights to Manchester, Birmingham, Southampton, Cardiff, Belfast, Londonderry, Aberdeen, Birmingham, Bristol, etc. So there were lots and lots of flights, and I think about 200 staff at Glasgow Airport. Then eventually an opportunity came up to be the airport manager, which I was successful in getting, and so I became the airport manager at Glasgow, and then they added to my portfolio by making me the airport manager for Aberdeen as well.
Managed 2 airports.
Yeah, which was a challenge. So I had to split my time, not equally, because the operation in Aberdeen was slightly smaller. So I would go up every few weeks to Aberdeen for 2 or 3 days, had an office up there, and then come back to my office in Glasgow. And then towards the end of my time in Scotland, and indeed in BA, BA decided to subcontract all its ground handling outside of London, basically. So places like Birmingham, Manchester, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen. So 2 of the airports that I looked after, we were having to make the decision to passed that over to a handling agent. So all of the staff were either offered the opportunity to 2P transfer across to the handling agent, but no longer working for British Airways, to take a severance package or to find a position elsewhere in BA. So I was involved not in the initial decision making. That was, taken at director level. So it's kind of passed on to me, almost like a poison chalice, to deliver for my airports. And indeed, I was part of the delivery of that for Edinburgh Airport as well, towards the end, because with myself and my colleague through in Edinburgh, our jobs went as well. I knew the writing was on the wall for me. So not only were 750 odd people losing their job in ground handling in Scotland, I was one of them.
Must have been a very difficult time for you.
I was trying to think about, what was going through my head. I think I was so busy looking after everyone else that I'd almost forgotten about myself. And I know that my management was saying to me, look, don't worry about yourself. We'll deal with you afterwards. And there's no time pressures. So don't think that when it closes the next day, you've gone. You're dealing with the staff. So I knew I had a little bit of give in that. But also at the time, I'm not going to go into detail, but, I was dealing with a lot of things personally outside of work. So, when I was talking earlier on about resilience, that's when your resilience really comes in. You have personal issues to deal with. Then you have the kind of the staffing side of things and having to tell people that have been in position for decades that there was no longer a job for them was difficult in the extreme. And then knowing that you were at some stage going to have to find yourself a job was an awful lot to deal with in a short period of time. 3 months. 3 months to deal with all of that. And of course, just to lay it on top of that, Bob, the people may recall a terrorist attack at Glasgow Airport.
Yes, I remember that.
I remember dealing with, issues at home and getting a phone call. Bearing in mind the handover to the new handling agent was the following week. Okay. So everything was geared up for the handover. All the staff had made decisions about where they were going to go and what they were going to do with their lives. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do with my life, etc. And I get a call from one of my duty managers saying there'd been a terrorist attack at the airport and I was needed. So I left what I was doing and headed for the airport. And there was a security perimeter around the airport. But because of my position and the pass that I held, allowed me to get beyond the perimeter. We were left with a situation where we had passengers, some airside, some landside, some staff airside, some landside. And of course, the kind of shock of it all, that this had happened in Glasgow. And there were some serious injuries. I mean, half a dozen people got seriously injured. None of my staff was seriously injured other than, in complete shock. I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, there was always going to be people closer to it than our people. Our check-in desks were probably about 50 yards away from the point of impact where this vehicle drove into the entrance. I think it had gas canisters. There was some kind of explosion, but it didn't go off in any way the way it was planned. But of course, the other amazing thing which you don't think about is the sprinkler system coming in to force and the amount of water that then comes down. We could have got that aircraft, that terminal up and running very, very quickly. But we were having to get rid of a lot of water. There was like 6 inches of water in the terminal.
Wow.
Because of the sprinklers constantly going because of what happened.
How long was the airport out of action?
I think, I mean, maybe people be surprised to learn. From memory, I think we got some operation back and running. I think within 2 or 3 days.
Mm.
Quite remarkable.
Mm.
Obviously, the police had to do their investigating work outside, but that the infrastructure wasn't damaged. Once we got rid of that water and the stench, the smell stayed for a long time. But once we got rid of that water, things were still there. The check-in desk, the baggage belts, the terminal infrastructure, it was all there. I mean, the damage was minimal in that regard. So it was just allowing for the investigation to take place and the damaged vehicle to be removed, and just kind of the taking a deep breath and just getting rid of the water. We were able to get up and running a lot quicker. But it was an amazing airport effort, not just by my staff, but by the airport staff coming together. Passengers were great as well. I think that it's times like that people do step up, really do.
Yeah. No, it's I say good. I use that in inverted commas. It's good that it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Okay, so you've reached a point where you sadly had to make a lot of people, help them sort of get made redundant. You had to, and then you went yourself. Then you had this thing going on. What were you feeling then about your career? Because it sounds to me, Steve, that you've always been pretty driven. You've always sort of known what you'd like to do, getting into management, which you did very successfully. But then it comes to a point where you're going to leave your career, as it was with British Airways. What were your thoughts about where you went next? What sort of ideas did you have?
Yeah, well, I wasn't too sure. I mean, BA had been my life since I was 17 years of age, and I was coming up to 50. I was 49. And I wasn't too sure. There was a part of me that didn't want to go. I felt like a lot of the people that I'd managed felt like that they didn't want to go. I mean, there's this emotional curve that you go through of initial denial that this is even happening. And then the kind of realization that it is happening and coming to terms with that. And then, putting some plans together. I mean, BA, I felt at the time was very good to me. And they may not have realized it at the time, but I think BA, gave people options.
Yeah.
They might have not been their ideal options, but there were 3 options. And the package to leave financially was a pretty good negotiated one. And a lot of people did find jobs elsewhere in British Airways. A lot of people went, flying as cabin crew, for example. And I said to myself at the time, if I can walk down the street and see an ex-employee of mine and not wanting to cross the road to avoid them, that would be my kind of inward test that I would be happy facing them. And I hope that they would see me and not want to cross the road. That scenario never happened, but I hope people respected that I did things as best I could for them. It did help knowing that I was in a similar boat. So I did get offered opportunities elsewhere in BA. I did get offered opportunities elsewhere. One was down at what was going to be Terminal 5 then, which would have been a poison chalice. If anyone remembers the opening of Terminal 5, it was pretty disastrous in so many respects. I would have been in the thick of things there as well. So I chose not to go down that route, and I was offered a couple of positions elsewhere in BA, both of which were overseas. One was in Italy and one was in New York. And my son repeatedly tells me I should have taken the New York job because he would love to have been in New York. But at the time, the priority was the kids.
Yeah.
And coming up to 50 years of age and my kids being 9 and 11, I didn't want to be elsewhere.
So what made you actually make the decision to leave, Steve?
Kids. Didn't want to travel elsewhere. Wanted to be home. Didn't want to live the other side of the world. And I think, coming up to 50, I felt, to put it simply, I had a good innings. I'd done 31 years, I think it was. And maybe this was a sign. Maybe this was an opportunity to do something different. I didn't know what, but this was maybe, the time to, find new pastures. So that's what happened. In effect, I managed to eke out a few more months from BA. They didn't put too much pressure on me. So after the closure of the airports, I think I had another 6 or 9 months tidying up loose ends and doing different things. But eventually, I took the money, took the package, and left. And I had some offers. Certainly, Glasgow Airport themselves offered me a senior management job. But I think that I think I was exhausted, Bob, as well.
Yeah.
I think I was drained from the personal stuff I was dealing with, and also drained from dealing with the closures, and the emotional turmoil of having to deal with so many people's situations.
Did you take some time out once you made that decision?
Yeah, virtually a year. I did a few little things, bits and bobs, to keep some money coming in, but nothing substantial. And then it was just purely, again, in conversation, a bit like conversation with Richard in Ops Control about joining cabin crew. I was in conversation with a lady, friends of mine, and her and her husband used to work for BA, and had a similar kind of decision making to make for themselves. They lived in Scotland now, and what were they going to do? And she just said to me, Steve, with all your knowledge and experience and skills, why don't you go out and sell you? And I thought for a moment, and I thought, maybe there's something in this. Maybe there's something in this. She said, you've got so much experience, and don't just think it's aviation. A lot of the things that you've experienced are transferable into any type of business. So you should go out and sell you. So that's what I did. I went back to the trough originally, in terms of people that I knew and people that would want, to have me help them. Handling agents, airlines and airports, etc. But eventually, I realized that people outside of the aviation industry were interested in me as well. So I did a lot of mentoring, a lot of coaching, a lot of training. Some, I would call it project work, where people called me in to help out with a particular aspect of their business that they were struggling with. A lot of it was people-related stuff. So some of it was leading and managing teams. Some of it was dealing with customers that they were having difficulty with. So it was interesting to suddenly be thrown into this world outside of aviation and British Airways, and I've made another career out of it.
Did you talk to any coaches and trainers and consultants that were already doing something, not necessarily in aviation? Did you talk to them about, what to charge and this sort of thing?
Yeah, because I had no idea.
No.
I had no idea. I'd been very protected in BA. Anything I wanted was at the end of a phone, whether it was an IT expert, an HR expert, or whatever. So suddenly to be on your own, and not, I as you know, I've mentioned I worked in sales, so I had some sales experience, and and worked on deals, etc. But I'd never been in a situation where I'd had to put a proposal together for myself. Yeah, and I had a CV that was very aviation centered. So I had to revamp that, if you like, and think about a biography for myself, a bio, if you like, that people would tune into. And also, think about how was I going to get my name out there. And, I started to think about websites and all the usual sorts of things. And I did the website thing. But interestingly enough, Bob, the website I found didn't do the selling bit for me. It was almost like you had to have a website because it gave you a kind of bit of credence. If you didn't have a website, people would question your validity.
Yeah.
But it was recommendation that brought me sales. One thing led to another, Once I got that first bit, it led on to something else, which led on to something else. And you got into this circle.
Did you find you got to a point where you were almost having to, say you couldn't take certain stuff on because you were that busy anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I was a one-man band. I mean, I had a situation at one point where I thought, crikey, there's so many opportunities here that I started to, talk to other people who had, more skills in some areas. So like I had an associate who had the kind of IT background. I had an associate who was more on the sort of health and safety front. I had an associate who was more on the employment law front, because those were things that I felt uncomfortable with. So I would, whilst I was selling me, I'd never turned anything down.
Yeah.
I would always say,
Absolutely.
it might not be me on this occasion, but I've got an associate, etc.
Yes.
So it worked. That model worked. But the charging thing was another thing. What do you charge people for your time? I knew what BA paid me, but I didn't know. I remember going and joining a network of coaches, business coaches, and someone said, "Oh, Steve, I wouldn't get out of bed for less than £1,000 a day." And I was astonished. And I was like, really? And they said, don't undervalue yourself. And it opened my eyes. I never did charge £1,000 a day, by the way, but it just showed me, what the potential was for things like coaching. And a lot of it is who you're coaching and how senior they are. Yeah, because I've coached everyone from co-workers through to owners and senior directors of businesses. So and would pitch it very, very differently because they would have their own unique challenges.
Yeah. Did you have any qualifications to coach? Did you take anything that sort of helped you learn how to do the coaching side of it? I mean, I know you had experience training, but I guess you needed to
nothing formal. Yeah, no. I'd done the BA. I had the BA badge, but that wasn't going to get me opening doors. So I realized very quickly you had to have a badge.
Yeah.
So I did two things. I got a teaching qualification, and I got a coaching qualification. So I was able to say I had the credibility with people. And it didn't necessarily get me the gig, but it got the door open, and it was on the website and it was certified, etc., by reputable bodies, awarding bodies, etc. So people could see that. So, anyone who is thinking about coaching, particularly, I think you need to have some formal training behind you. And I think that's only right. You need to have the foundations in place, because coaching, I realized very, very quickly was not what I thought it was.
In what way?
I thought coaching was a bit like a sporting coach, a tennis coach or athletics coach or a football coach. You showed them how to do it, but that's not coaching. That pretty much is training. So coaching is very different. Coaching comes from within, and it's giving people the opportunity to find the answers themselves. So giving them the framework, guiding them and supporting them, and giving them feedback, and helping them to find solutions for themselves. And that's the mistake often people make when they are coaching, because often you've heard it yourself. I'm many decades managing and dealing with people, so you've experienced most things, and you're hearing this conversation and you're thinking, I know what they need to do, I know what they need to do, I know how they can fix this. But of course it would be a short-term fix, because I came up with it, not them. The longer term sustainable solutions come from within. So it was just getting them to find solutions for themselves and just zipping it.
You wouldn't tell them what it was, but you would sort of get them to almost point them in the right direction so that they find it themselves.
Yeah. When you last did that, how was that for you, type thing? It's a bit of a cliche, but how was it for you? Why did it feel that way? What would it look? What do you think success would look like? What building blocks from there, basically, and a lot of it is goal setting and how do you achieve those goals, etc.
Typically, how many hours work is involved in one of these qualifications?
Well, you can do different levels. Mine was quite in depth. It was a residential course. It was a week, and a period of self-study, and a lot of it was recording, etc. And giving you feedback. But yeah, you can get the badge fairly quickly, and it's not, the prices aren't exorbitant. You could probably do it online. I wouldn't recommend that. Most things you can do online these days. I think there's nothing like being in a room full of other people going through a similar experience. So I chose an organisation. It was actually through the Chartered Management Institute. So if anyone was interested, I would probably start with them. They have various levels of qualification, and that would be a good starting point.
You still got your business?
Yeah. It's still, initially when I started out, I positioned myself very much as a consultant, of which training was just part of it. But over the last 5 years, I recognized that, when I look back on all the work I was doing, it was primarily training, coaching, and mentoring. And I used to call myself Business Lighthouse. And the idea being, if you're on a bit of wobbly ground, or you're on a ship and you're not too sure where you're going, you look like you're going to hit the rocks, and there's this lighthouse that kind of saves the day. I was your lighthouse. That was the kind of thinking behind it. But it was a consultancy type thing. And yeah, there was consultancy work there. But I found over time it was more of training, coaching, and mentoring. So latterly I thought, well, why am I pretending that I'm this business lighthouse, this consultant, when I'm not? I'm actually training, coaching, and mentoring. So I kind of changed the business and what I was doing. So yeah, and it's been great. I've met all sorts of people from all sorts of organizations. If I put up a slide now, it would be covered in very familiar names and unfamiliar names. Big organizations like the NHS. I've worked for high street brands like Matalan and Tesco Bank and the like. I've worked for sports organizations. I've worked for charities. I've worked for big engineering businesses like like do some Babcock's, big engineering firm. But as I say to people, the issues are no different.
No.
Whether you're a large corporate, a small business startup, a charity, a sports organization, because a lot of things I'm dealing with is about people.
Yeah.
It's either customers, suppliers, staff. So wherever you go in any of these organizations, the issues are still the same. They might be magnified a little bit because of the size of the organization.
Yeah. But it's the same
But the
principles at stake.
fundamental issues are still the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can see that you really enjoy your coaching bit to it. And I guess the whole experience of working in the airline industry with people has enabled you to do what you do now. What do you think what do you think the young Steve Snow at 20 would have said about Steve Snow at your age now, doing what you're doing? What would he have said?
Well, I think the first thing he would say is, I can't quite believe it. You lucky sod. You know, to work for an organization like that, and I have to kind of caveat that with, it's not the organization that it is now. British Airways has changed. The business model has changed. Aviation has changed for the good and the bad. I had it during the good times, if you like, but it gave me so many opportunities. You know, I think I changed my job, you know, more than a dozen times. You know, I've given you, you know, kind of the main thread of it. But to join an organization and having that opportunity to do that variation of work was tremendous looking back on. And thank God I went this route and not the police. I don't quite know where I'd be now. You know, to meet such amazing people, to work with such amazing people, to be put in situations that really tested me and grew me as an individual. I mean, I've often said to people, particularly with the crew thing, I started as a boy and I left crew as a man. I think that was a turning point for me, the crew thing. It speeded up my life experiences in those 7 or 8 years that I had. You know, some people take a lifetime to experience what I experienced in 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
And I still talk about them now.
Yes.
You know, I still, you know, borrow those experiences in BA in everything that I do now. There's always situations that come up, scenarios that I talk about, what ifs, maybes, you know, when I'm talking to people in other businesses. And of course, it always goes down quite well because people like to hear that kind of stuff as well. You know, when I was in Africa, when I was in India, when I was dealing with this person, when I was dealing with that crisis.
I guess everybody can picture it because they've been in aircraft, they've seen flight, they've seen cabin crew and everything.
Yeah, everyone has a view, you know, on flying and their experience. And, you know, some people love it and some people hate it. You know, and, you know, I was fortunate to have great experiences, you know, and I still love to travel. So you know, that boy from Windsor would never believe that I've been around the world so many times, traveled on Concorde, traveled to places that people can only dream of, and meet some fascinating people that I've learned an awful lot from. And being able to share that now and give back. You know, I've done a lot of work recently with young people through the Prince's Trust.
Have you?
And, you know, to give back to young people and to share that experience and say, there's a great video. If anyone has an opportunity, Denzel Washington, you know, great actor, does a lot of motivational speaking. And there's a video, I think you'll find it on YouTube, and it's about dreams. And I'll never forget one of the lines in it. Dreams will only be dreams unless you have goals, and the importance of having goals. Yeah. And I often say to people, what's your dream? What do you want to do? Where, in an ideal world, where do you want to, and I even talk to people who are thinking about retirement. What is retirement? What do you want it to look like? But for a lot of them, it will stay a dream unless they have goals. So, a lot of what I talk about now is trying to make those dreams reality through their goal setting. And especially with young people, have your dreams.
Yeah, but have a goal. But I guess just as important as the goal is the journey as well.
Yeah, and lap it up. Be a sponge. Be a sponge. And I think, for me, as I suggested earlier on in our conversation, I was hungry to get to the top. The top is a lonely place, and you'll be knocked off the top unless you've got those life experiences. I didn't have the opportunity to tell you, but I did when I was in the in-flight product department. I was given the opportunity to be the manager for my boss while they were on maternity leave. And big mistake I made was gathering up all my things from my desk and plonking them in the manager's office and shutting the door. I was the manager now. I was naive and stupid. And I quickly realized that I'd completely ostracized everyone. So, you've got to make those mistakes, though, to become a good manager, a good leader of people. You have to, you go on a training course doesn't make you a great leader or a great manager. It's experiencing it and experiencing failure and issues and problems along the way, but learning from it, reflect. One of the things I say to people, please, please, please reflect on what's happened. Learn from it. Because otherwise things don't change. It's a broken record, just round and round and round. You've got to break out of that. The only way you can do that is reflect and learn and do something differently next time. Yeah, do something different. I don't think we do something different enough. Often we do the same thing all the time. And we wonder why it's miserable. And we wonder why we don't like it. And we wonder why we get depressed. And we wonder why we get down in the dumps. Do something differently. Break the mold.
Some great advice there, Steve. Great catching up after all these years. You really have had a fascinating career, and it's been really interesting to hear about what life is like working for a major international airline. And I especially like some of those insights that you gave, that you all those learnings that you've had over the years and the experiences. So I think that's really useful. My guest today has been Steve Snow. Steve is the owner of Training and Coaching Limited, a business which provides bespoke training and coaching to individuals and organisations. Thanks for coming on the show, Steve.
Pleasure, Bob. Nice to talk to you again. You take care now.
You have been listening to Undercurrent Stories. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share the show link to your friends and family, and if you have 60 seconds, I will be most grateful if you would please rate and review. To hear more episodes, please subscribe to the show and visit undercurrentstories.com. If you leave your email in the link, we will notify you as soon as new episodes are released. Also, check out our social media links, details of which can be found on the show notes. Until next time, this is Bob Wells wishing you all the very best.